Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us at Journal of the Plague Years. I'm Susan Zakin. I'm the editor, and this is Brian Del Monte. And I want to introduce him because Brian and I met in a way that I think is kind of funny because I was reading Brian, among other incarnations, writes a very popular and very compelling Substack called The Long Memo. He also has a second Substack, which Borderless Living, which we can talk about if we have time. But I was a reader of The Long Memo, and I thought and it indeed read like a very smart, long, sometimes memo,
Thank you.
extremely well organized, incisive. And Brian was saying things that nobody else was saying. He was dealing with what the full catastrophe of what's been happening here, both on the micro level, with a very impressive detail about how changes were being implemented, but also really good big picture stuff. So I think, I don't know, Brian, I think maybe I wanted to quote you, or I don't know what it was, but I contacted you and I was telling you, I can't do this. He writes the long memo under a pseudonym, William Finnegan. I don't know if that's Finnegan's Wake or, well, we can talk about
It
that,
was. It
but
was.
it was,
Yeah.
although a little easier to read than Finnegan's Wake. And I just thought, I can't quote you or I can't use what you say unless I know who you are. And I
Right.
want to say you were very cagey. And we went back and forth a few times. I said, look, I'm a journalist. I understand, you've got a persona here, which is pretty
Right.
cool. I think it was only because I know you're running an ad agency now. I think it was only when I mentioned that because I mentioned that my stepmother had been a copywriter during the Mad Men years.
Correct.
And she was like, I loved her. She was this incredibly talented woman. One of the Mad Men characters was actually supposedly based on her. And then you kind of opened up a little bit.
I did. Well, there were two things. One was, I had people who would approach me, and yeah, I wrote under a pseudonym for a couple of reasons. Primarily was not to have what I was doing with my agency collide with what I was doing on Substack.
Well,
Okay.
let's talk about why you were so
Right.
good. Because I just want to make sure that we talk about
Right.
just get kind of set the table here. Because Brian was recruited by the DoD
I
out of a
was. Yeah.
graduate program at George Washington, and I'm actually putting my wrong glasses on. And you were doing an international relations
Doctorate.
degree, minor in
Yeah.
political methodology.
Right.
Um, but then, and we can talk about this, but you were recruited um, to write to the Bush administration,
Correct.
as I understand it, just as the Guantanamo
All that stuff
story
was exploding. Yep.
was exploding. And
Right.
and we should just briefly kind of get people up to speed with that in case they are too
Lived
young.
under a rock during most of the early
Yeah,
2000s.
or young and don't remember. There were issues about the Geneva Convention.
Just a
Guantanamo
few.
Bay is a I guess detention center in
Right.
Cuba, where basically American military people were
I don't
torturing
know if I'll agree to that, but yes, those were the allegations.
detainees.
It was
Yes.
both in Cuba and in Iraq itself. So
Ah,
there
yes.
was the war, generally what was called the global war on terror, right? We
And
were engaged in Iraq and we were engaged in Afghanistan, and we had detainees at a U.S. facility that was built in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
and and what we're going to talk about today, of course, is the news
Right.
with our fearless leader, Pete Hegseth, because these issues have returned.
Yes.
And I know that Brian, you and I might not be that young, too young to remember Guantanamo, but we were very young when My Lai happened. So this
Yes.
is not the first time the United States has uh, faced these issues and gone through
Yes.
some questioning. So maybe we can talk about Guantanamo a bit and what the reaction of the Bush administration was, and then we can do the old English major compare and contrast to what is happening now. And please get, really looking forward to your breakdown of an analysis of what's happening now. I want to say that I love the description that George Will had as these are war crimes without a war. But anyway, I mean, they may or may
Right.
not be
And
war
I
crimes, but it
actually
was a
think I
great
was
line.
probably the first commentator to inject the idea that a war wasn't present.
Yes. So, okay. So please get us up to speed with how you walked into this shitstorm, basically.
Well, so I'll just real briefly. So my family and we had moved to Washington, D.C. because I wanted to pursue a doctorate degree in international relations. And a funny thing happened on the way to that, 9/11. Okay, I remember, for most people they watch 9/11 on TV. I lived it.
Mm,
Okay. And for people who lived in DC and for people who live in New York, it's not that it's different for us that experienced it firsthand.
that's right.
Okay, that's not to diminish everyone else in any way, but it was not a television show for us. Okay. So when that event happened, obviously it was a galvanizing event, and I wanted to serve the country. I realized the moment that had occurred. I realized it was going to be a turning point in history. And so I, along with pretty much everybody else at GW that was in international relations or comparative politics, we all threw our hats to the national security community, the agency, the NSA, DIA, DOD, et cetera. Okay. And it's funny because a lot of my friends all got hired one after the other, largely because they were all quantitative experts. So a couple of years later, like 3 years later, I get this call from this man who would change my life forever. He was a colonel, and he was leading, unbeknownst to me at the time, an office called Detainee Affairs inside policy. Actually, it was inside policy, but it was inside special operations. And he calls me up and he's like, "Did you send me a resume?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like 3 years ago." I mean, I remember this day. We joke about it from time to time. I actually called him on the 20th anniversary of this phone call last year. And he's like, "Yeah, I need somebody like you." And I was like, "Okay, well, why?" And he made his pitch. And the best part of this pitch was the work sucks. It's going to be 17, 18 hours a day, and I can't pay you. I go, "You can't pay me? Pentagon makes like goddamn $600 billion. What do you mean you can't pay me?" And he's like, "Well, because that's not how this works at the moment. I need people with your skills. You'd have to be a special government employee." Okay. So I was like, "So let's see if I got this straight. The detail is crap. The issue is crap. The hours are long and you can't pay me." And he's like, "Yeah, I think you pretty much got it." And I go, "Okay, well, let me ask this. Is the work going to matter?" And he's like, "Oh, yes." I go, "Is the work going to allow us to kill bad guys?" He goes, "Absolutely." I go, "Okay." And so that started me on a journey that took me to places that I would have never imagined.
Mm.
The White House, the agency, the Situation Room, the tank. I've seen the big war board, from
This the
Doctor
tank. Tell
Strangelove,
our
right?
readers what the tank is.
Yeah. Well,
What
so
is
the tank, they call it the tank. It's a skiff, which is a facility that allows you to handle classified information. But they call it the tank because it's a bunker in the National Command Area. We'll just call it that in DC. Okay, it's in the Pentagon, but it allows our senior military leaders to be protected during crises and quite frankly, nuclear attacks. Okay. So we call it
Mm.
the tank because basically there's this, door that locks and everything, and right, and they're locked in there. Um, I went and testified before Parliament, Congress, Council on Foreign Relations, Chatham House. I mean, I have to go back and think about it all. But it took me, for a guy who was studying international relations, I was like, whoa, this is like the Super Bowl,
Eh,
right?
yeah.
I wrote speeches. I worked on policies. I helped write laws that are policies and laws, by the way, that are still in existence to this day. So maybe I was okay at it. Um, and so that,
Guantanamo was, but the story was breaking just as you
well,
started
it was
this
Abu Ghraib actually
unpaid
that had exploded. It was
job.
Abu Ghraib that had exploded actually at that point.
Ah,
So as you'll recall, we had
yeah.
essentially one of the most divisive human rights crises since the United States continued to believe and execute the death penalty. Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo became an issue that every one of our allies, every one of our partners, every conversation, it didn't matter if they were there to meet about a trade deal, detention operations would come up with senior leaders. Okay, that was the level of that crisis at the time. Okay, so I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about what's going on now. But
Yeah.
essentially, that was my training ground. Okay, was to deal with that. So as a consequence of my time dealing with that, I got a intensive education on the laws of armed conflict. I got an intensive education on human rights law. I got an intensive education on the entire framework of how our alliances work, how international law works, how intelligence sharing works, how the coordination of defense policy works. Okay. And so when the report from the Washington Post happened last week, I was like, holy cow, we have completely lost the bubble on this, if this is correct. And unfortunately, my first instinct was to believe it
Well, let's talk about
because,
the Bush administration
sure,
reaction to Abu Ghraib. I mean, if that's okay with
sure,
you,
sure. I
because
mean, I
when we
can't speak for
spoke,
the former president, but yeah.
well, he's not
So,
speaking much, so
oh,
I
he's
think you
not.
should weigh in.
He's not. Which again is
But
totally
I mean, I
expected
thought
in
this
my
was
view. I
very
know
te
people. I know people like Nicole Wallace are frustrated with him, but I'm like, this is who the guy was. So,
Well, but I mean, when we spoke earlier, that was very
yeah,
telling to me. I don't want to give short shrift to what's happening now,
right.
but the reaction of the Bushies was quite enlightening for me when you told me.
Yeah, so I guess we'll go with this. With Dick Cheney's passing, I said, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to get their doctorate degrees studying this man, right? Especially during this time in terms of the global war on terrorism. One of the things I told you in our pre-interview, which I think has led to, in part, where we are now. During the global war on terrorism, in my opinion, we made an unforced error. Okay. And Colin Powell desperately attempted to stop this from happening. But we made the statement that we said the Geneva Conventions don't apply in our conflict with Al Qaeda. Okay. A, it's not true as a matter of law. Number one, it's also not true as a matter of policy as to what we actually did at the time. Okay. So even with all of the things that happened on 9/11, and I'm going to speak only to the Department of Defense. Okay, I can't speak to what the agency did. I can't speak to what the NSA did. But in terms of what our soldiers did, the rule of law and the laws of armed conflict were applied. And when soldiers broke those rules and orders, they went to court martial. They went to prison, a good number of them. Okay, there were reductions in rank. I mean, people forget about with Abu Ghraib. There were a lot of people who wound up going to prison and wound up losing their rank and everything else. Okay, now war is messy. It's inherently evil. Okay, it's exceptionally ugly. But the United States did hold its soldiers accountable for the rules of engagement and for the laws of armed conflict. Okay, now was it perfect? No, I'm not going to say it was perfect. But when the vice president basically convinced the president to say that the Geneva Conventions don't apply, all of our allies went nonlinear.
Mm,
because they were disgusted. Now there are, I don't want to go too deep into things, but there are divergences and breaches between us and predominantly the Europeans, largely with respect to, quite frankly, Yasser Arafat and the PLO, with respect to an amendment to the conventions called Protocol 1. Okay. And essentially, the Europeans wanted anybody fighting to be treated as if they were soldiers. And the position of the United States is and remains, you have to be a lawful combatant to be fully protected by Geneva 2, okay, which is what protects soldiers, okay? We allow in war, just so people, listeners understand, we allow in war acts that are without question crimes in any other context. Murder, mayhem, bombing people, destruction of property, occupation of property, taking property. Okay. Now, even within all of that context, right, the laws of armed conflict, what don't we allow? Well, we don't allow shooting the wounded. We don't allow rape. We don't allow institutionalized torture. Okay. We don't allow terror campaigns. This is what the conventions say. Okay. We don't allow perfidy. In other words, you can't pretend to be the enemy and sneak through their lines and then surprise, kill them. Okay,
mm,
that's called perfidy. You can't dress up as Red Cross members and actually be the enemy and sneak behind enemy lines and attack them. Okay, you can't launch attacks from churches and schools and things like that. These are protected buildings. Okay, so there are all kinds of rules to conflict, which may seem problematic, right, to understand, but going all the way back to the earliest conflicts, no one wants a war where the only outcome can be the full annihilation of the enemy. Okay. And so at a very early stage, the idea was okay, look, yeah, we're at war, but we need rules. Otherwise, things get so out of hand, it's impossible to continue. Okay. So, and here's the thing wars rarely end in the full annihilation of the enemy. Okay. And so what happens after war? Well, you got to have peace and you got to somehow put the order back together. And if the idea is, well, everyone conducting themselves with absolutely no quarter and no accord, well, that
mm.
makes the peace impossible, which is why it's like, well, then we got to fight to the death until one side gets annihilated. Okay. So, in a very rough way, this is why international humanitarian law exists. If people are like, well, why are there rules? Well, because the alternative is complete annihilation of one another. And that's not an outcome that anybody is engaged in or wants. Excuse me. So we have rules. And the Bush administration, though, said, look, this is a new conflict. This is a new enemy, type of enemy. The Geneva Conventions don't apply. Well, that was wrong as a matter of law, and it was wrong as a matter of fact. So, honestly, what I spent the better part of my time doing was trying to put the pin back in the grenade on that and a few other issues that we made unintentionally. Okay, because the Geneva Conventions did apply. The problem is Al Qaeda doesn't get a lot of protections because the Geneva Conventions and the laws of war presume states make war against one another.
Right.
Okay, so they presume that states exercise enough authority over their own citizens that they go and hold them criminally responsible if they commit acts of war against aggressors that aren't authorized by the state. So, like, let's say a group of Frenchmen attack the United States. Okay, well, we would expect France to hold those people accountable, and we would want to hold them accountable under criminal law. We wouldn't declare war against France, although with this president, I can't speak to that. Okay, but that's the idea, right? So in the case of the global war on terrorism, we had a failed state. We had Afghanistan.
Hmm.
Okay, that was run by a regime that was not universally recognized, the Taliban. They
Right.
had allowed a non-state actor, Al Qaeda, to operate within their borders. Okay, so I understand the idea that they tried to convey, which is these people are not combatants recognized under the law, and thus they don't have combatant immunity. Okay, that's what we wanted to say, I think, if I'm being charitable. But instead, we said the Geneva Conventions don't apply. which was wrong. They most certainly applied. It was an international armed conflict. There was a declaration of military force being authorized. The United States was operating internationally, and we most certainly, as a matter of our practice, DoD elements conformed to the Geneva Conventions to the extent that in something as heinous and messy as a conflict, people conform to the rules. Okay.
Can I just back you up for
Yeah.
1 second? Okay, I think so. As you're talking, and this is as you're talking, what I'm thinking, having written a novel based on the war in Sierra Leone in the 1990s and really looked at war,
Mhm.
is you are describing by saying what the rules are. Breaking the rules actually seems to define much of modern conflict. That war is now all of those things.
It can
That
be.
you're
The safest
saying
place to be still is
quite
uniform, though.
often. Look at what
Yeah.
Russia's doing in Ukraine. Look at what happened in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, Sudan. I mean, I just for a continuum now, as much as this Hegseth situation may be kind of just honestly, as you have suggested to me, kind of a screw up.
Well, it's a
But
criminal act.
the is it does it also show us another point on that graph as these norms erode? And of course, the United States, which really kudos to the professionalism of the military here, has had a strong ethos despite the abuses that everybody talks about. Those are remarkable because they are not the norm, uh,
Right.
more or less not the norm. You know,
Right.
so
They
what
happen,
bothered
but like I said, war is messy, so there are going to be
it
bad actors. The
exactly,
question is not
and
are there going
people
to
are
be
in
bad
fear,
actors?
young
It's what,
guys in fear
but
for
it's
their
what,
lives.
but to think
So
about Russia or to think about Sierra Leone, those actors are not willing to hold those malfeasants responsible. Up until Trump, the United States was.
I think what's striking is me is how do we go from Abu Ghraib, where there were abuses, the Bush administration took some accountability. You, as I understand it, were tasked with writing a framework so it wouldn't happen again, to this bizarre deadly clown car of Pete Hegseth in off the coast of Venezuela.
Sure.
And if these are 2 points on a graph, how can you map that? And then it's terrible to ask two questions at once, but I do wonder, in terms of this story, which I know you've been following very closely, how do you think this will affect the kind of proverbial white male swing voter who does care about the military, may have served in the military, but yeah. So where are we on this continuum?
Well, let me deal with that second question first. I can't speak to all levels of the military. The people that I remain in contact with still are the people that I knew during my time in the Pentagon and in government service. Now, some of those people are very senior in rank, okay, lieutenant colonel all the way up to 4 stars, okay. They are all beside themselves in the discussions I've had because going back to July, when they first started deploying soldiers to US cities, I posed a question to all of them and I said, what order do you believe is so obviously manifestly unlawful that they'll say no? This is before, Pete Hegseth came out at his little rally with the president about no fat chicks and everything, everything else and all their nonsense, right? And I'm like, what's going to happen if a Marine detachment is told to open fire on protesters? What's going to happen if, things go sideways? Okay. In part because my instinct was that the chain of command would not hold. So I asked individuals for whom the burden of command was placed. Okay, I'm
Mm.
talking about company and brigade, battalion. I mean, these are people who are trusted with leading thousands of people potentially into battle. Okay, these are not amateurs. Okay. And they were like, well, I feel pretty confident that any order to commit murder will be rejected. And I said, are you sure about that? And every person at the time over the summer explained to me how they wouldn't place themselves in that type of legal jeopardy. They wouldn't place their families in that type of jeopardy, etc. And I said, well, I really hope you're right. Okay. Then this happened. I've had a chance to talk to those people again. And they're like, you apparently were right. And I'm like, well, I'm not pleased about that fact, but it sure looks that way, doesn't it? Okay. This is, in my opinion, the greatest breakdown of military discipline and adherence to the values of the oaths that they all swore to since Lee led an army against the Union. Okay. It's that level of seriousness. Okay. I'm sorry. The admiral in the room should have said to the secretary, you can't order me to get a pizza, let alone to kill someone. They know what the law is. And for any of you that are interested, go read 10 USC 113. Spells out what the secretary's responsibilities and authorities are. He is not an operational element. So I don't care what he said. Anything that comes out of his mouth is babble with respect to the execution of kinetic military activity, in my
I don't
opinion.
think most people
And
know
that,
that
and
the
that,
Secretary of Defense can't give an order.
yeah, I mean, so he acts like
Right.
he's the war fighter. He's not.
Mhm.
Okay. And since I worked with more than a couple of secretaries of defense, I hate to say this, their job basically is relatively straightforward. It's hard. I can also tell you how to win the Stanley Cup and I can tell you how to win the Masters. That doesn't mean I know how to do it.
All right.
Okay.
Mm.
But the secretary's job basically boils down to three things. Ensure that the Department of Defense has the resources necessary to defend the United States against the threats it believes are most likely. Ensure that the people who are in our services are properly trained and equipped. Okay. And ensure that the ability of the Department of Defense to meet the threats posed to the United States are thought through and addressed. So basically, it's training, equipping, and strategy. Those are super important things. Okay.
Right.
Now, if any of you are interested, okay, there was a law that was passed during the 1980s called Goldwater-Nichols that completely changed how the Department of Defense functioned. Okay. And it's funny because this whole I want to be the Secretary of War. I'm like, what do you guys want to rewrite Goldwater-Nichols? Because honestly, that's why we won Gulf One. It's why have won and so dominated every enemy since is because of all the restructuring that was done under Goldwater-Nichols. Okay, and again, I'm not gonna
It's an
go deep into it,
administrative
but people should
reorganization
go and
of the
look at online.
department.
People should go look at online on
Yeah.
Wikipedia Goldwater-Nichols.
It's an
Okay,
administrative restructuring of the Department of Defense.
and a functional restructuring too.
Yeah,
Okay,
functional. All right.
but the
All right.
secretary is not a war fighter. Okay, he's the principal advisor to the president on national security and military matters. He's in charge of basically the Pentagon. Okay. And like I said, his primary job is to train, equip, and ensure the strategy, resources, innovation, etc., exists to meet America's conflicts. It's up to the combatant commanders and the war fighters to actually fight the war. So this 4-star, and I can't remember his name at the moment. I should, but I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
can't.
I can't either.
Who was the head of special operations, should have said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, you can't order me to do anything. And if you want us to do this, I need to hear it from the President of the United States." But he didn't say that. And
No.
his deputy commander should have said, "I'm sorry, Mr. 4-star, but I'm a little bit fuzzy as to what the legalities are of these orders." Okay. And not to go deep into it, basically the administration wants to argue. So how do we get from here to there? Okay. because we took all our law and we just threw it out the window. That's how you get from here to there. Okay. The administration's position, as far
Hmm.
as I can deduce, goes something like this: Tren de Aragua and Cartel de Soleil, I think that's how you pronounce those, are foreign terrorist organizations. As such, we may use the full panoply of power of the United States government. It's a neat theory. It's not consistent with the law. It's not consistent with even prior practice. Bill
But is this a
Clinton,
continuation of Cheney's argument?
no, no,
No?
it's not. It's a wholesale new argument. We're
Uh,
basically saying, I mean, basically the Trump doctrine is the
there's a
strong do what
Trump
they
doctrine?
will.
Wait.
The strong, well, okay, whatever. The
Yeah.
observed behavior. It may be too strong to call it a doctrine, but if I wanted to characterize the observed behavior of the Trump administration, it's the strong do what they want and the weak suffer what they must.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so there is no connection between designating an organization a foreign terrorist organization and that allowing the use of military force against that organization. Okay. And to give you evidence of that fact, Bill Clinton declared the Taliban and Al Qaeda foreign terrorist organizations. We did limited strikes, if you'll recall, against Al Qaeda facilities while he was president.
Uh-huh.
When 9/11 happened, nobody said, well, it's on like Donkey Kong because we declared it an FTO 20 years earlier. No, they said we have to go to Congress and get an authorization for the use of military force because clearly Al Qaeda cannot be dealt with in the box of law enforcement. The foreign, the anti death penalty, or no, the ADEPA, right? It's the death penalty, effective death penalty act and whatnot. That's where that whole FTO thing lives. Okay, when it was passed, and it's about criminal sanctions. It's about punishing those who help terrorist organizations. It's about denying them passports. It's about denying them access to bank accounts. And it's
Banking.
criminal.
Right. Big
Okay,
deal.
it's
Banking.
criminal. It's not,
Yeah.
well, if they're declared an FTO, it's on like Donkey Kong. That is not what that law says.
Right.
Okay. So
Mhm.
so again, that's why I'm like, okay, well, apparently we don't care about the law. What we care about is doing whatever the heck we want. Okay, so this is, look, people may not like what I did for Bush. They may not like Abu Ghraib. They may not like Guantanamo. I get all that. Okay. But we were serious people that looked at the law. There were serious discussions about how the law applied. Every view was brought to the president and not in some haphazard, half assed way. Okay. Those that believed in certain strong positions that were contrary to what we actually did, they got heard. I was there on some of these meetings. Okay.
Mhm.
And when things didn't go our way in the court, I can honestly tell you that no one, from the president down to the lowest guy, said, well, screw what that judge said. We're going to do whatever the hell we want. Okay.
So
And,
the
and so, so it's not in a continuation of what we were doing. It's just
yeah,
not.
it's
Okay.
stochastic. It's
It's
stochastic.
completely different because, so recognizing that's why these former flag and field officers are like, holy Christ, we may have completely lost the bubble. That's why I said in my piece, I'm like, look, you don't need to go to the Hague for this. This is just straight up crime and conspiracy to commit crime. It is not lawful to give these orders. And even if I want to accept there's a state of armed conflict, which there isn't, but okay, for the sake of argument, I will. When, Admiral so and so, did you believe it was lawful under the laws of armed conflict to shoot the wounded and to shoot the combatants who were in hors de combat? And this is not ambiguous. These are not ambiguous concepts. These are things every flag officer knows. These are things every field commander knows about what the laws of war say roughly. And it's not like we give people a complicated we're like, don't shoot the wounded, don't shoot people surrendering, don't shoot civilians. Okay. I mean, these are not, again, I know you roll your eyes. Okay. But we hold people accountable.
Yeah, yeah, we
Okay.
do.
For
We
that.
do.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
I'm only
Exactly.
rolling my eyes because that has become so common throughout the world. Not because I feel that we've done it.
But let's talk about why was it so important? Because, I mean, the way that these people behave in the regime is, oh, you guys are all cucks and sheep and we're out there killing people. Okay.
Mm.
I have no sympathy for narco terrorists. I had no sympathy for Al Qaeda. What I do have sympathy for is how our soldiers should be treated if they're captured and what our expectations are in terms of reciprocity. So, John Rawls, I obey the laws I don't like because I want others to obey the laws I do like.
That's right.
Okay. We have an obligation to follow the rules because we want our service members not to get chopped up into pieces, not to get summarily executed, not to be shot while surrendering. Okay. And so if you treat the enemy, they will treat you the same way. Okay. So at this point, if U.S. forces were to go into Venezuela and let's say a squad got captured or a squad tried to surrender, I would expect the Venezuelans to completely mow them down.
All right.
Okay, so it's like, look, I don't care about these narco terrorists, and I have no illusions about who was on these boats. Okay, and I'm like, okay, fine, they're narco terrorists. That doesn't give you the legal authority to blow them up
Well,
because we're
I
not
just want to
of armed
stop for a
conflict.
second because, as I understand it, there has been no evidence. Some of them may be narco, drug
And
smugglers.
arguendo, even if I just
But
want to
we
accept
don't.
they are.
But apparently, it appears that not all of them are.
Okay, so
So,
let's. But
wait. I
again,
have another question.
since I've
I have
actually gone
another.
through this process, and since I've actually gone through this process, let me tell you what seems to be missing
Yeah.
based on what people have said in Congress and elsewhere. Okay, if you want to do this type of operation, you have to conduct a finding. Okay, basically, the intelligence and defense services do their due diligence, and they
Right.
go to the president,
Are we
and they're
killing
like,
the
"We
right people?
believe, we
Yeah.
believe X and Y and Z is true."
Mm-hmm.
The president says, "I, as the commander in chief of the United States, I agree with this finding. I believe these individuals present a clear and present danger to the national security of the United States, and
Mm-hmm.
I am hereby authorizing executive action against these individuals." And he signs it. Okay. And then somebody like me and others go to Congress to the Gang of Eight. And I've been in Gang of Eight briefings,
Explain
and
what
they're
the
not
Gang of
pleasant.
Eight. Explain what the
Okay. So
Gang
the
of.
Gang of Eight is basically the four leaders of the majority and the minority in the House, and the four leaders of the majority and the minority in the Senate get briefings. They get told. They get a chance to ask questions, but they can't do anything. They can't tell the president what to do. President's still the commander in chief of the United States military. So we would go in and we would say, "Okay, here's what's going on." And oftentimes they'd be like, "Wow, really didn't want to know that today, but thanks." Okay. And they can't say anything. It's not like they can go to the microphone and be like, "Oh, geez, you won't believe what I just heard." Okay.
Yeah.
So they get Congress gets informed. Why? Because Congress has a right under the Constitution of oversight of the president's military activities. Okay. Congress gets to declare war. Congress has to be kept informed about the prosecution of armed conflict.
Was any of this done?
I have no idea. Based
Mm,
on how members of Congress are acting, I suspect not.
I
But
suspect.
I have no idea.
Mm,
Okay. I can't imagine that we wouldn't have heard something. I mean, if you remember back in the day with like the special renditions and all the other things, I mean, Pelosi and Reed and others, Boehner and others were like, "Yeah, we were told."
right,
Yeah,
right,
it's not
right.
our role. It's not our role to tell the president what to do, but we knew.
Right.
Okay? We're not hearing any of that right now, are we? We're not hearing anybody. You got Roger Wicker. I'm shocked, I say, to find gambling in the casino. Really? Okay. Why? You voted for that clown twice. You voted him out of committee and you voted to confirm him. And now you're shocked he's an idiot?
Roger Wicker strikes me as someone
Okay.
who at least has some ethics. I just don't know where he
Well, we'll
misplaced
see.
them
But
recently. Yeah. Uh-huh.
but the point I'm trying to make is Congress gets informed.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, how does Pete Hegseth behave? No one can report on anything in the Pentagon. We're not telling Congress doodly squat. All the reports we're making to Congress, forget that. That's done. I'm like, wow. I wish we'd have thought of that back in the Bush administration because I used to spend a third of my time answering Congress's questions.
Right.
Okay. Um, international community can go kiss my butt, right? That's their other position. And I'm just like, wow, okay. So how are our allies reacting? Well, Britain is like, I'm not telling you anything anymore.
Yeah, I saw that. Hmm.
And others are doing that as well. Why? Because they're very conscious of how liability under international law flows. That's why they're stopping the intelligence gathering. They know there's a cost to doing that with the president. And they're like, well, let's see. What would we rather deal with? A lunatic who's mad at us, or we all get hauled into the Hague?
Right.
And
And
that's the calculus they're making at the moment, right? And so Hegseth is thoroughly unqualified to be the Secretary of Defense. It was more than dragged out during his confirmation hearing.
right,
Okay. Every time he speaks, flag officers roll their eyes.
right.
I mean, who is the type of guy who should be the Secretary of Defense? Okay.
Mark Kelly,
And when I mean guy, I mean just generally person. Okay. I'm not
Mark
saying,
Kelly, Mark
yeah,
Kelly. Is
somebody
he?
like that. I think Mark Kelly would make an exceptionally good Secretary of Defense. Okay. And I'm not generally in favor of former military officers being in that role. Okay. I mean, like Lloyd Austin did an amazing job, in my opinion. And I met Lloyd back when he was the commander of 10th Mountain. Okay. He was exceptionally good,
Mm,
despite the hiccups he had here and there, because he understood the enterprise. Whereas, for example, Jim Mattis, who I think was probably the most gifted field commander we had had since purging, I don't think he did all that well as SecDef. Okay. And
well,
so it's like, okay. But here's the thing. Again, since they understand the SecDef's job is to run the department, he's
which is
not the
huge,
war fighter.
which is
You want
huge.
someone who's like the former CEO of PepsiCo or the former CEO of
Right,
AT&T or somebody like that. Okay. Because those people have demonstrated skills to run complex, diverse, international, multi jurisdictional enterprises. That is what the Department of Defense is.
right.
Okay. That's not Pete Hegseth, now is it?
Well, he couldn't run his little NGO. I want to ask you about Venezuela because
Sure.
one of our colleagues, Mark Cooper, I'm going to run his story. I think as this video comes out, he wrote a very clever and interesting piece about Venezuela. And as I was looking to illustrate it, there is a great graphic of the proliferation of Navy ships off the coast of Venezuela. It's a few little red dots, then more, 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 more.
Yeah, we
And
have
it's
quite the
like,
flotilla down there.
the law of
Yeah.
short stories. You have a gun in the beginning of a story, it has to go off right by the end.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Chekhov's gun is definitely at play here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so it almost seemed like this was waiting to happen. And then given the people involved, although the admiral one would have expected something different from, perhaps. I mean, he had a great record.
Well,
Uh, so the gun
look
went
at
off,
Admiral
but
Halsey though. But look
is
at Admiral Halsey, who was the commander of Southcom.
he
He heard
left?
this whole thing briefed.
Yeah.
Apparently, and I've heard from multiple people, apparently it got heated. And
Mm,
he was like, I am not going to be a party to this.
yeah.
Now, I respect that. I would have preferred he'd stayed in his post and resisted unlawful orders, but I also know what the consequences of that are. Okay,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
he would have faced court martial. He would have faced the loss of his pension. His family would have paid for that. Okay, so I'm
Right.
not unsympathetic to that.
Right.
But but the guy worked his entire life. Do you have any idea how many few flag officers? First of all, how many highly qualified field grade officers become admirals and generals?
Mm,
First of all, that's like miracle number one. Let alone you go from 1 star to 2 star to 3 star to 4 star. Okay, only a small percentage of those who make flag that ever happens to. Okay, and then the number of people who go from 3 star to being a combatant commander. I mean, that's like the triple lotto win. Okay, so this guy spent his entire career to get to the top. and he's there for 8 months and he walks away to spend more time with his family.
He resigned, and it was
Yeah.
clearly over this.
And it was clearly over this because he looked at it and he's like, no. So I can respect that. But you know what? These others, apparently that wasn't on their mind. So my long-term concern is it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. Who the heck's going to be left? Is it only going to be the
Absolutely.
phony tough and the crazy brave that are willing to do anything? Because Millie was right. They swear an oath to the Constitution, not to a king. They swear an oath to the rule of law, not to a person. Okay.
Absolutely.
And given the sacrifices our service members make, that's important.
I have two questions. One, I think what the readers really would like to know, we would all like to know, and maybe this is an impossible question to answer, but as those red dots multiply, although I don't know if they're multiplying quite as quickly now after this, do you foresee an invasion of Venezuela?
Look, as I joked with you when you wanted to do this interview, if Trump nuked the moon between when we first talked and Wednesday, I wouldn't have been shocked by it. Okay.
Yeah, we
Um,
talked about
there
that.
is no foundational basis at the moment for the United States to attack Venezuela. Okay. Now, maybe there are good reasons to attack Venezuela. If so, we haven't heard them.
We talked
Okay.
about that, and it was oil for Trump, right?
I understand, and I do believe
Right.
that is the case.
I
Okay.
wouldn't call it
And I do
foundational.
believe, but in terms of, hey, Congress, hey,
Mm,
American people,
mm,
you know, look, countries don't win wars against the United States, they survive them. So there's no doubt between the outcome between Maduro and the US military.
yeah,
He's going to lose.
yeah.
Okay. The Venezuelans are not going to resist the United States military. Okay. So when I talk about, look, the foundation hasn't been set, we have not made the case before the international community or before the American people. While why risking one single American soldier is worth it over this. Okay. And, again, I don't know if there have been findings because, here's the other thing too, just like optics wise, which is what this regime seems to really care about. What sounds better? A bunch of dead guys floating in the ocean and the drugs go to the bottom of the ocean? Or here's the gym we rented and look at this gigantic pyramid of drugs that we seized from these clowns. And here's pictures of everybody we arrested. Which one of those two have better optics if you're fighting the war on drugs?
Well, also, I think Trump is politically weak right now, and so selling this in some way would be,
Oh, it's impossible at
again,
this point.
it would
I
contradict.
mean, unless Maduro, like, I don't know, blows up the Silver Dome or something, there's no way that a Congress is going to so about face on this that suddenly an AUMF becomes possible. I mean,
Especially right
Venezuela would have to attack the United States at this point.
now. So, and in closing, I just want to ask you about the press coverage
Sure.
because you were, I think, justifiably critical of it. Although I do think that a lot of the folks have caught up
Yes.
on it, and I know. How does critique it for me, and what should the press be doing better? I mean, there are so many things, but on this
Yeah.
issue,
No, but like what's the phenomenon of what's going on, right?
well,
So
how have they covered it, and how have they done good things, and how have they not gotten it?
on this issue, and I think this is a just a phenomenon happening in Western society. We People producing news content prefer speed over accuracy.
Yeah.
Okay. And so everything's breaking news, right? Breaking news, I'm in the train. It's like, okay, I understand why you're doing all that because of how the nature of social media and all these independent journalists are doing things. Okay. The problem is, if you will, the traditional journalists also suck on this because they're not reporting anything. I mean, I never thought I'd see eye to eye with Lawrence O'Donnell, but yeah, I'm with you. The White House press corps is ridiculous. I can't imagine Helen Thomas or Sam Donaldson behaving this way with Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. so
Yeah. Right.
so I understand his argument on that. And it's not just that though. It's across the board. And so, oh my God, we didn't give these guys quarter. Whoa, 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 back up. There's no armed conflict. Okay. We are marching into a war with no justification, no foundation, no legal basis. That's part of this story here you all missed, because
The
what you
bigger
want to
picture.
say
The bigger
is
picture.
Trump's a dick and he did yet again a thing that sucks. And I get it, right? Because that gets views, that gets likes, that gets restacks, that gets shared, blah, blah, blah. You monetize that attention. I get it.
Mm,
Okay. But part of the reason why I think the long memo became popular is I'm like, well, wait. That's not how any of this works.
right.
And since I'm someone who was on the inside, I can be like, and I've said this to you, the things that people find most interesting when the president was like, well, I don't know if the Epstein bills come to my desk. I'm like, well, wait, that's a lie. Let me explain to you the mechanics of how this actually works. Okay. And I've done a lot of those. I'm like, here's the mechanics of how your government actually functions. And I know this because I used to be involved in it. Okay. And I'm like,
Right.
I don't understand why members of the press don't understand this, because this is like simple functionings of the government that you understand in terms of what they're covering. But nobody challenged Trump on, well, gee, I guess he doesn't know if he got the bill or not. I'm like, that is nonsense. That is a lie.
Well, one of
Okay,
the
we
things.
can know whether or not he got these things. And so when I think about how things are reported,
Mm-hmm.
everybody wants to race to essentially, unless you're Fox News, in which case it's 38 ways you can make Velveeta statues of Trump.
Of
Everybody
Megyn
else,
Kelly.
or Megyn
Yeah,
Kelly or whatever,
right.
right? Or
Yeah,
Caroline Levitt or whatever,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Everybody else is, here's another
Caroline.
thing Trump did that's just going to piss you the hell off.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
well, you know what? Since the guy commits like 300 felonies a day and tracking them all is a full-time job with overtime, I
Right,
get it. Okay,
right.
what I need to know, if you're going to be, there's that rant, right, with Aaron Sorkin in Newsroom about the reason why the American civilization and society was able to do the things it did was because they were rational and informed. Well, yeah, we're seeing what happens when they're not.
Well, as I said to you on the phone the other day, and don't anyway, with us, of course, you don't have to worry about us doing things quickly because we never do.
Right.
We're
Right.
like the second day lead, if not the third. But one of the things that was always a problem for me as a journalist when I was working for daily newspapers and magazines too, and I was covering politics. I was covering politics in DC, is I was always interested in the larger historical currents because that seemed to me important, and even more so now because I'm sure I know you started Borderless Living, which is helping people make decisions. Do I want to stay in this country?
Right.
And when Trump 2.0 started, I told you I started really reading historians
Right.
more than journalists because I felt that as journalist, I always felt that the language of journalism was inadequate, and I grew up on the new journalism, and when we started the journal, it was really the new journalism.
Right.
Really, I think creative in the way we approach things, but stuck with the bulletproof old school ethics of journalism. But I think that what we're all grappling with is, and it really emerges for me in your comparison of how Bush dealt with this issue and how it's playing out now, is how much of the super, the structure has eroded, how
Yeah.
much is disintegrating,
Yeah.
and I think it keeps people up at night. What do I do? What do I do? There,
Yeah.
and I know personally, I go back and forth about cautious optimism, between cautious optimism and like holy shit, you know. So,
Well, you know my nickname. People call me Mr. Happy Fun Guy because all I ever talk about is how things are coming apart, right? I I think people do need to recognize that there are a series of macro trends that are overlapping, that are augmenting each other, and that you're not crazy
yeah,
for being disoriented.
yeah.
Okay. And so, in part, talking a little bit about borderless living, in part, people, Trump is not causing people to suddenly decide to leave. Okay. Gallup and others did polling before Trump came into to office, and something like 43% of Americans were thinking of living somewhere else. Okay.
Mm,
Well, that can't be realistic because, we're talking about roughly, 40% of the country is going to leave. Country will collapse. But what it reflects is that discussion is happening more and more and more about, is the United States really the right place for me to live? Okay. And that's actually happening around the world. It's most acutely happening in the United States for a whole bunch of reasons we don't have time to discuss. But people are looking at Trump and it's like an accelerant.
mm,
Okay.
mhm.
Because every institution's under assault.
That's right.
Every norm is under assault, right? So we had Trump 1, where they got a taste of power. And then we have what I call the interregnum with Biden. And now it's back on. So it's like we got cancer, we had chemo, we went into remission, but now it's back. And it's
Yeah,
back
well,
with a
the second
vengeance.
time you get it is when it
Okay.
kills you, right? I
Right,
mean,
right. So
uh,
people like
that's
Snyder and
not a good
Gaia
analogy. I
and
don't,
others, well, it's the accurate one.
I
Like I
don't
said,
like it.
that's why people call me Mr. Happy Fun Guy, right? Um, but I'm a structural thinker, I'm a systems thinker. And so, people who are feeling this way, is it just Trump? No. If the Democrats magically pull their head out of their ass and win the midterms, which, by the way, I've never seen Democrats so happy to lose as last night. Honest to God.
Okay, all right.
Okay. But, and again, I'm no longer aligned
Spoken
with
like a former
Republicans, but I'm like,
Republican.
my God, you would have thought they won the way everybody was
I
carrying on.
know.
But I get it. Okay. But my point is even if they win, even if they lose, these are structural trends that
Right.
are overlapping.
And they're
Okay.
global.
And
They're
they're
global.
global. And they're
Yeah.
global. Okay. And so, is Trump accelerating it? Yeah, I think he is, because every institution that we rely on is under attack. And so people are like, whoa, what? I mean, nothing seems safe anymore.
Yeah.
And that actually happens even at an individual level.
Sure.
You're like, oh, I used to spend summers at Aunt Edna, Aunt Edna's place. And now she's going on about the N word and Jews and everything else and spouting MAGA nonsense. And basically, poof, head explodes because, Aunt Edna used to be like one of the safe people that in your lives. And
Mm.
now she's a cancerous lunatic. Okay.
No,
And
and
so that's
economic
happening at a micro
insecurity.
level and a macro level at the
Well, we
same
don't know
time.
what's going to happen to the housing market. We
Right.
don't know what's going to happen to the stock market. But beyond that, I think it's an existential crisis for us because we were, I hope this doesn't sound too corny, but I certainly was steeped in the values of the Enlightenment, of the framers of the Constitution.
Hmm.
And I had a sense of safety
Hmm.
in the United States, and that is so profound for people. And I think it's sometimes hard to distinguish between, as the old '70s phrase goes, the personal and the political. I mean, how
Well, I
much
think
of
Tip
this is
O'Neill got it right. All politics is local.
oh yeah. But yeah, that's right. And so that's I think what's really hard for people because Americans have been used to
Hmm.
having personal crises. Oh my
Right.
God, so and so doesn't like me.
Right.
I'm getting
Right.
divorced, whatever.
Right. Right.
Oh,
But
I'm
the framework of the society they lived in wasn't unraveling.
yeah, that's right.
Right.
And they don't think of themselves as creatures of history. And
Right.
we are. And
Right.
listen, I think we need to wind it up, but I
Yep.
cannot tell you how important um I think everything you've said has been, and we should do this again now that you've come out from the shadows,
Yes, right.
Mr. Finnegan.
So
And
now I'll have every lunatic coming after
I'm
me.
so sorry. And
But
I'm honored that you did it on our on our
yeah, well,
Substack.
going back to when initially, right, I had said, look, journalists know who I am. And then when you had told me your credentials, I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll talk on the phone. But people have known who I am. I've been hiding from Google, not from the government. I've been, you know, so, so, and hiding from Google is relatively straightforward, especially since I'm an expert on search engine activities. But, it is, it's great to be on. I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, let's do this again sometime.
Definitely. Thank you so much.